Well, hello again, and hopefully we didn't frighten all of you away. Yuka and I have known each other for 40 years. We were revolutionaries in CISV. We met in Hamburg, and everybody said, oh, everything is wonderful, and we said, no, it isn't. There are things that can be changed and should be changed, and we were working together on it. I was coming from the perspective of a law school dean, and Yuka from a head teacher in Finland, but we both said that things had to change, that the education in CISV, education in the classroom, in cross-cultural learning cannot be just by accident. If you said you were going to do an exchange and you didn't plan it, you could just go to the airport when there's a mess, and all the kids who could be sticking, they could be there learning, chatting with one another, but it's hardly what you would call an educational program. It was an accident. And so we were both change agents. Now, that's not always an easy or a popular thing to be. But it's the way it was. And in CISV and in a lot of other cross-cultural educations, we do experiential education, we do things for cooperation, and we play trust games. And I think that education is maybe the biggest trust game there is. And times have changed. My father was a teacher in the high school, and we had a family that had a lot of money. And this lady said to my father's colleague, "What do you think Donald's chances are of graduating from high school?" He said, "Well, frankly, your best bet's to build your own school." Today, you just wouldn't say something like that, but it was a form of civic courage, and it was, in fact, true. So the other thing I want, just as we start, I want you to think that we are looking after other people's children. Whether it's in education and in risk, we're looking after other people's children. And what we're doing is child-centered. So we're now looking at international programs and the impact on participants and managers. And then the second part is going to be very, very contemporary. What are we going to do? How are you adapting to the new data protection rules? Because it's a big, big deal. So I have a couple of things that I put occasionally on my Facebook page. One of the recent ones says you can't value children and education if you don't value teachers. And the other thing I learned from a long time ago, that in the Western world, our teaching is based on the Roman system. In Rome, slaves taught, as opposed to Greece, where citizens taught. So sometimes, at least in the US, if you were at a private school, they want the best teachers, they want all the best equipment, but they don't want to pay for it. And you should be very happy to have the privilege of teaching their children. So we're not slaves. So I'll take it from that. And when we were chatting the other day, it was talking about the joy of learning and happiness of students and learning by doing and cooperation. So those themes we want to come through time and time again on this idea of international programs, the impact on participants, and things we have to think about as the risk managers and the organizers, okay? Now, what I've done is I wrote this paper much like it would be an article for a journal. It's on the website in full with all the citations. So you can read it at your leisure. You can take your time to do it. You can ignore it. And all the citations are there. So if you want to find out more or read it or get the idea, you don't need to try to frantically make notes. And as I said, we're in experiential education. Now, as opposed to dealing in a classroom, the participants in experiential education are involved in doing it themselves. Not sitting and listening, but doing. They learn from others and they learn on their own. They share the responsibility for the learning. They share decisions. And they're learning how to learn and how to do and practice. In CISV, we want people to learn to cooperate. We say that we're training future leaders. Not that they're going to all be prime ministers or ambassadors, but they might be teachers. They might be doctors. They may be a wonderful parent who stays at home. But they are going to be teaching and helping shape how the future is going to be. We have to, in experiential education, to identify a problem and help find the solution. And then you apply it. You observe, you apply, you do, and then you analyze, and then you adapt, and it goes in the circle again and again. So we're going to be practical, immediate approaches to problems. Next, please. In another part of the world, a long time ago, Confucius said, I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. My father was a teacher, and he sometimes would get really aggravated with me. And he'd say, Joe, do I have to draw a picture? And the answer was yes. If I can see it, then I can understand it. If you're just talking about it, I have one hell of a time. And my friends say that about IT for me. So if I hear it, I forget it. If I see it, I remember. If I do it, I understand. Okay? Now, we talked about intercultural competence and A plus ask. This diagram shows you how that's a little bit like the lens on a camera. And if you look, you have awareness of other cultures, of the values and considerations of other people, of prejudices, of your own thinking processes, and knowledge about the program, terminology, that you're prepared with before you go, the pre-camp, you know about your own culture. Attitudes, having an open mind, flexibility, empathy. And you're taking the initiative. You're not just sitting back and waiting for something to happen. And on skills, it could be listening. It could be learning how to organize. You could be learning how to organize another conference, how to delegate, how to cooperate, how to lead, and how to respond to needs of others, okay? So in the intercultural competence, we're going to look at establishing and maintaining relationships. In CISV, we say establish and make friends. The ability to communicate with minimal loss or distortion. I hope that minimal loss is what you're hearing with the translations. And I apologize that I'm not very good at my Romanian. And the ability to collaborate with others to accomplish something of mutual interest. So that's what we talk about with intercultural competence. And it is a key, absolutely key, essential for the way we're going to have to live in the future. Okay? Now, you just heard Yuko talking about quality. And he said what distinguishes experiential cross-cultural learning from entertainment and recreation is the purposefulness of the instructors and the people designing the activities and provoking meaningful thought, intelligent learning responses. It's not an accident. What looks really easy, and like anybody can do it, we all know that's really difficult to do. Well-designed activities can still be fun. There's no reason, just because something is well thought out, that it has to be misery. So we have to work on that. Now we came up some time ago with what we call a gemstone model. If you think of a diamond, it's polished and has lots of facets so that it sparkles. And if you put that diamond in the mount on the ring, it is made particularly to look beautiful, but also to be nice, to be useful. So we do needs and assessment planning. You know explicitly about the educational assumptions. You know what the program goals and the objectives are. You know what the themes are you're trying to do, whether it's that day in the classroom or in that activity for people. You know about the participants and the facilitators. You selected them carefully. You trained them. You know what the program design is. You know about the place. And you know how you're going to implement it, and then you're going to report back. And when you report back, it might be research, it might be an evaluation, and then it starts again. The whole process starts again. So I think that you could use this gemstone model for anything. It works very nicely. Next, please. Now, we're switching gears. I'm a lawyer. And this is about risk management. When I became Secretary General of CISV International, nobody said boo about risk management. It became like 40 or 50% of my job. And people said, well, what is that? In fact, we had a board member from Denmark who said, we never had these kind of problems until you came. We never had these problems until there was a lawyer there. I said, no, you had the problem. You just didn't know you had the problem. And we know that ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance has a high price. So we want to think about what is risk management. And actually the best definition we've seen comes from Australia and New Zealand. And this is the definition. It's talking about a logical and systematic way of establishing the context, identifying, analyzing, evaluating what can go wrong, communicating those risks, looking at every layer of the organization about how you have to deal with it. And it's two things. It's minimizing loss and maximizing gain. Risk is not some terrible, horrible thing. If you don't have any risk, you don't have any love. If you don't have any risk, you don't have any profit. If you actually, the only thing that is like, has no movement is dead. So you want to think about it as identifying opportunities and also reducing loss. And it's good management. And it's true, excuse me, throughout the EU. If you have accounting standards for organizations, for companies, for schools, they want to know what is your risk management. If you're applying for a grant, or you want to make a cross-cultural exchange or a school program, somebody's going to ask you, what are the risks? Have you thought about this and this and this? How will you react to it? So that's what we're talking about here, is risk. Oops, we lost it. This is a little model I came up with. It looks at ethics and educational application and policy. And you can see that there's different layers of responsibility and things in each of these triangles, and they all move in cooperation with each other around and around. What did they used to say? That he who runs around in circles shall be known as a wheel. But in experiential education and in these things, everything seems to be circular. You take an element, you apply it, you evaluate it, and then you adapt it and you change and improve it on the next way around. In educational exchange, you cannot do a good job if you aren't focusing on ethics. And ethics have two parts. One part is on the things that you agree on for goals and values and standards. The other side of that is that you also have to agree on what duties and responsibilities there are. In CISV, when I was Secretary General, we had a board table when we met annually that was about the size of this platform up here. 50 countries, one person per country. From many different kinds of walks of life and occupations, different abilities in English, and 7 different legal systems. And we had to agree on what was going to be the standard of responsibility, the standard of conduct for the leaders, for the children, for the participants who were helping, the volunteers. So you had to agree on all those things. And that can be really difficult. There were countries, let's say, if you were in Anglo-Saxon Northern Europe, you talked about insurance like it was air. You expected insurance to be there, like breathing. If you were from Brazil or some parts of Africa and some places in Asia, there's just no way. If you were in some countries, and we said we had to have £500,000 local insurance. They said, well, you must be corrupt. Why would you need £500,000? So we had to work at coming up with common ways of looking at it. And if you look at each of you here, you're made up a bit like an onion. In different layers. Some things you learned as a child from your parents or from your friends. When you went to school, you learned other things. Maybe at church or in the mosque or the synagogue, you learned something else. When you went to university, you learned some more. And you entered your profession, you had some more. Some things you learned in the law. So each layer is like an onion. Now, when we have each of us with our cultural background and our academic training, we know how we will react almost instinctively when something happens. The problem is, and we say that's common sense. The problem is, we each have a different kind of common sense. So we have to learn to be culturally competent as risk managers, as people running programs, looking after children, so that when we're talking about things, we're agreeing on basic issues. In the Declaration of the Rights of all the religions, they met for weeks. And they boiled it down to essentially 2 sentences, and it's just like the Golden Rule. And when you look at the Declaration of the Responsibilities that was proposed for the UN, none of them were contradicting your Declaration of Rights. But Declaration of Rights, human rights, is more of a North Atlantic concept, and the Declaration of Duties was more of a Southern Hemisphere idea. So we had to marry those two, and you can get easily then common ground for goals and duties. Next, please. So this is what we were talking about with common sense. We have to work on coming together and agreeing on a shared common sense. I have a little thing on Facebook that said, common sense is a flower that doesn't grow in many gardens. So we have to be, as we learned earlier today, we have to be cultivating the garden. We need to plant some seeds and carefully look after the seeds and the little plants, be sure they're watered so that we have some common sense flowers for us all to look at. Next, please. Now this, I don't know if you can read it. It says, it was not raining when Noah built the ark. This is actually a picture of Yuka and his sons and his brother-in-law building a boat. And that was outside Yuka's house in Moscow. But I think that little quote, that it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark, applies very practically to what we have to do in terms of planning and executing a good program and using common sense for cross-cultural educational programs. You have to think ahead. You have to think not about the million weird things that can happen, but the practical, normal things that can happen. And if you don't know, then you can talk to a lawyer or to an insurance company people, or you can get a risk manager or they'll help you. Next, please. Now we're switching gears completely. I said to Alexandra, I'm going to ask her a question. How many of you in this room in the last 4 to 6 weeks have had messages from Facebook, your email accounts, Twitter, whatever you're doing, places that you buy online or anything, and what do they say? We're updating our privacy rules. And if you don't, well, I think they lied on some of them. They said, if you don't answer this, you won't hear from us anymore. I don't believe that for a minute. But everybody was updating their privacy laws. And why? Because the European Union's new rules on data protection and privacy came into effect on the 25th of May, 2018, just a few weeks ago. I asked a question earlier this morning about an app, and did it apply? Did GDPR work with that? Personally, I think not. That company is also in Britain, and there's no such app in Britain. But what do they mean by personal data in the new law? It's any information that relates to you as an identified or identifiable living human, or living individual. GDPR does not apply to dead people, only alive ones. And it has, practical things, your home address, your name, your ID number or your social security number, your internet protocol, IP code, information on your health, and on some other things, sensitive things like race, political opinions, gender. Those things are very sensitive, and they have particular protection. And one of the things that also is very particular is the protection of children. And how many of us here have used pictures to advertise a program, to put something up in the school or on a web page? So there are new laws that apply about videos and photographs of children. So next, please. Now, the rules apply when your data is collected, used, or stored. And it doesn't make any difference whether it's on paper or digital, if it's a structured filing system. Now, I think in my house, I'm okay. I have no structure in my filing system. But Organizations like schools and NGOs and corporations do have structured filing systems. And there's one rule for everybody in the EU, even Britain when they leave, and anybody who does work inside the EU must apply, the rules apply equally to them all. The rule travels with the data. Next slide, please. We have special rules with children. So that if the person is under age 16, and in a few countries down to as low as 13, parents must give permission for the data to be used and held by somebody. Except if a child is going to be counseled, they're having a problem, a mental or a social problem, they're getting counseling, the parents do not have to give permission for that counseling to take place. Next, please. Now, somebody said, we don't really worry too much about that here. And I knew somebody who is the managing director of a very big company in England. And Dale keeps saying to the business people, we've got to deal with this thing. And they say, oh, don't worry, don't worry. The rule says that if you get caught, the fine can be 20 million euros or 4% of your gross product for the year globally. Now, that's not aimed at you, probably, but it is at Google and Facebook and people like that. So you really must pay attention to this. Now, I'm going to ask Alexandra a question. You collected from every single one of us here information for our registration, for the payment, and so on. Are you working on a policy, for a new policy for privacy? Yes, of course you are. So and you wouldn't necessarily have thought about how important that might be, even in your school. So this is the permission that CISV has a parent sign to use the images or art or written work. I agree that CISV may use and publish artwork, photographs, and written work, as well as video and audio tape created as part of participation in the CISV program, which may include my child. CISV may use these items in the production of educational or promotional materials, put it on the web page. They can be used or published with a child's age and nationality, but that's all. Unless specific parental consent is obtained, no child will be identified by name. Next, please. Now, I'm a governor of a school in Newcastle. I've been a governor at Hawthorne for 20 years. The city of Newcastle issued in late April, 3 weeks before we were to have the new law come into effect, a one-page summary of the new law. I went to a conference in Brussels held at the European Parliament, and I got the packet with the legal interpretation of the rules. It is 88 pages long. It is complicated reading. It's vague, but at our school, we had to take that one page that really said almost nothing, and it is now an 8-page policy document. Now, I will have an appendix that has that policy document and the written permission things and the forms, so you don't have to worry about that. And it'll help you maybe as a template. You can use it and adapt it as you like, but at least it's something tangible and is free. At my school, I said, I'm in charge of risk management and health and safety and the building. And I said, I don't think that our business manager has the time or the expertise to do this, at least in the transition period. If there's something goes wrong, they're going to have the legal responsibility. And I don't think that's fair. So we hired a company to at least get us through this first transition bit for 1 year. And if they screw up, we'll sue them. But we won't be responsible as governors because we hired somebody who had good credentials, and they said that that's what they were going to do. So we will be giving that to you both for the permission on the photos and on the policy document. And just so you also know, and it relates, the Ministry of Education in England has issued 56 pages of rules about trips involving schools, and there's 4 pages and 2 other pages of forms for what kind of forms and permission a parent must give to the school. So it's complicated, and it may be that in some countries it'll be less complicated than that. But it is a big, big deal. And don't be terribly frightened by it. Just use common sense. And if you have a governor or a board member who's a lawyer, say, okay, what do we do? If not, hire somebody. It'll be a good investment for just a short time. Next, please. Next. Now, I am very, very proud of CISV and Hawthorne, not because they have wonderful data protection and privacy laws. They do, but that's not why they are great educational organizations. They're doing a good job. So this is CISV, and we have a lot of non-competitive cooperative games, like you see here with the parachute. Next. I'm really, really proud of my school. When I became a governor, we were one of the 3 poorest, economically poorest school districts for a primary school in the United Kingdom. And we're a small school. We have 220 students. Our building was built in the 1960s by some fool who had split level classrooms, and the whole school is on an incline. There are no ramps, no elevators, so we finally are exempt from rules about being able to take care of disabled people. And we were going to get a new school, and then there was a budget cut, and that money went away. So, but 6 years ago, when I was the vice chair, the head teacher, the head of the governors, and I sat down with some representatives of the symphony, and we said, we want to apply to be in the In Harmony program. We were selected as one of 4 schools in the whole country. It's based on El Sistema in Venezuela. And every single child in our school, when they're 5 years old, picks what instrument they want to play. There was a little boy whose arms were so short, he wanted to be a trombonist. And I thought, damn, how's he going to get his arms lined up? We have children who have cellos on their back, and the cello is taller than the child. Every single child has an instrument. 4 days a week, every child has 1 hour of music instruction by members of the symphony. 3 times a year, every child, all the parents and the teachers get free tickets and free bus pass to go to the symphony hall. And if a child is identified as having great potential as a professional musician, on Sundays they go with all the other kids like them from the region, and they have free instruction. So, and we've had so many research projects with our kids, 2 BBC films, and visitors from everywhere. Some of our kids have been invited to go to Bergen, Norway. You know, and they go to London and they met the people from Venezuela. And this slide here says the Geordie Symphony School. If you were born north of the River Tyne, in this Newcastle upon Tyne, then you're a Geordie. The language is based on Danish because the Vikings ruled us for 200 years there. And most people in Britain don't have a clue what the hell they're saying when you have 2 Geordies speaking to each other. But the pride that was generated by this school program for these kids is immense. Our children come from a neighborhood where there's never been anything to be proud about. The parents don't have pride in the kids didn't have pride in themselves, the community didn't have pride in the school or the program or the kids. Now it's just astounding what happens. And those children's attention span has changed. We now have, I think, 42% of the school are immigrants. We have children who've come to us who learned a sign language to sing and to read music before they know how to read English. By the time those children are with us and they go to the end of Key Stage 2 at year 6, those children are at or beyond the ability in the English language of the children who are from England. So it's really remarkable. But the best thing is that every single kid has enormous pride in the school and in themselves. And you don't have bullying. Now the next slide, please. This is from a national artist who came in and did pictures. Next. This is in CISV. That was me in 1972, in the middle. Next. That's the city and the quayside. That's the River Tyne. And these are some of our children playing in Symphony Hall. This little boy here, the black boy, the big one, also plays a flute. Now you can imagine in a lot of schools, if a big kid plays the flute, his life is going to be miserable. Not at our school. So it's a wonderful experience, and it has built pride and competence and educational attainment. Next. So this is a bunch of CISV kids from a village, age 11. And then the last slide, and then we have questions. It says, education doesn't need to be reformed. It needs to be transformed. The key is not to be a standardized education, but to personalize it, to build achievement on discovering the individual talents of each child, to put students in an environment where they want to learn and where they can naturally discover their true passions. So now I'm open for questions. Anybody?
Thank you for sharing this with us. It was really inspiring. But my question is very technical. You mentioned at some point that if a child has mental problem or emotional problems, parents don't need to give their agreement so that the child is helped.
Can get counseling, professional counseling.
I was surprised, and I would really need the law, or I don't know, behind
I quoted
this.
the law exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because our school counselor gives parents agreements at the beginning of the year, and some of them refuse to sign the agreement, and sometimes we're stuck. We cannot help a child because of that.
I never said that it wouldn't be easy. We've talked about change agents and changing with the times. This is a legal obligation. It's not optional.
And I didn't see the site. Maybe it was on the first slide. You said that we should look on the website and find all the information.
If you look on the material that's going to be, you know, a picture of me,
Okay.
I have both presentations fully documented, this slideshow, and I'll give you an appendix.
Okay. Thank you so
But
much.
it'll be in there, and you can look up the GDPR. It'll be in Romanian, as well as in other languages.
Okay.
But it's quite simple and
Thank you.
straightforward.
It's really useful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Then I think we're ready to turn it over to the real revolutionary lady here.